When given the task to create a 5-minute short film, I immediately knew that I wanted to create a social realism film because I'd seen a lot of social realism films that influenced me. I especially enjoyed About a Girl and its hard-hitting and interesting representation of the lower class, and I wanted to follow this in my film by also having an interesting and compelling representation of society. I then looked into social realism films and their conventions, and I followed and developed these into my film. Characteristics included Story of Ordinary Life, which I followed through showing Scarlett's journey to her interview and how the selfishness in society altered her day. Hostility towards the traditional establishment, which I followed through emphasising and highlighting the selfishness in society. And documentary style, which I followed through having Scarlett directly talking to the camera about her observations about selfishness in society. About a Girl's use of colour is a convention I followed and developed in my film. Due to About a Girl being a social realism film, it used mostly dull colours such as greys and creams and dark greens, and these colours reflected the lower class outlook on life, which is quite dull and pessimistic. I followed this convention through also having quite subdued and dull colours within my film, especially in my character's costume, and by having the documentary part of my film in black and white, to reflect the harshness and the emotionless aspects of society, and helping to create a downbeat and pessimistic style to my film, which is a convention of social realism films. As well as having a strong social realism element in my film, I also wanted to include influences from postmodernism. From the main story of my film, I took influence from the postmodern film 500 Days of Summer. In 500 Days of Summer, there is a reality versus expectation sequence where it shows the two outcomes of Tom turning up to Summer's party. It follows the self-reflective element of postmodernism, highlighting how Hollywood typically showed the perfect side of the story rather than the reality. I also used the reality versus expectation sequence in my film, showing the perfect side of society where people aren't selfish, and then the reality side of society where people are becoming increasingly selfish and self-centred. I also break the fourth wall in the documentary element of my film, which is a convention of the self-reflective element of postmodernism and is also used in 500 Days of Summer. Another element of postmodernism is pastiche, bricolage and intertextuality. I have used bricolage in my film, as I've taken the idea from the film Sliding Doors, where they show two sides of reality and how one small event can have an immense difference, but I've altered it through making it relevant to today's society. I have taken the idea from Sliding Doors and used it to show how someone's selfish act can have an effect much wider than they imagine. Social realism is a theme that runs throughout all my texts. I wanted to have similarities throughout my text, and reflection was a key element. I wanted reflection to be key in my text, as social realism films are about highlighting and reflecting the less desirable side of society. The main photos in my poster feature a reflection, where the expectation side of Scarlett is looking away from the mirror, looking smart and polished, and the reality side of Scarlett is the reflection inside the mirror, looking dishevelled and stressed, looking towards the expectation Scarlett. The main photos on my film review also featured reflections, creating a clear running theme throughout the three texts. A clear link between my poster and my film is expectation versus reality. In my film, the main sequence features a reality versus expectation sequence. In my poster, the main photos also feature expectation versus reality, with the expectation photo being filled with adjectives to describe Scarlett in the expectation section of my film, and the reality photo being filled with adjectives to describe Scarlett in the reality section of my film. I wanted to have a clear link between my film and my poster so that audiences could use the adjectives in my poster to decipher Scarlett's feeling in the reality versus expectation sequence. I also included subtle links between my poster and my film, such as how the colour of my title in the poster is the same colour as the title in my film. I used high key lighting for the expectation side of my poster to create a bright and vibrant look to the poster, reflecting the bright optimistic side of the expectation of society. However, I used a low-key lighting and a black and white effect on the reality side of my poster to reflect the social realism aspect of my film and the bleakness and harshness of the reality of society. I chose to have 3 slightly hidden photos surrounding Scarlett's reflection in the mirror to reflect the pressure on Scarlett in the film and I chose to have 3 to represent the 3 other characters in my film who altered the outcome of her interview. For my film review, I decided to create something that was quite different from my other 2 texts because I wanted to create a full review site so that it looked like an independent film review site's opinion on my film. However, I still wanted to have some similar elements so that there was a running theme throughout all my texts. I chose to have my film review black and white to follow the running theme of social realism, as black and white reflects the harshness and bleakness of society, as there is little colour and therefore little happiness. Before beginning my film, I created a short survey using SurveyMonkey to better understand my audience and their likes and dislikes about short films. This helped me to adjust my film ideas so that it would more effectively appeal to my audience. The subject of my film is something that most people can relate to in their everyday lives, and the response in my survey was that most people liked a short film that they could relate to. The majority of my audience also said that they enjoy short films that make a social comment, which made me more confident about my film idea as it is a social realism film. I also used this survey to find out about my audience opinion on my film subject, the selfishness in society. I asked whether they would agree that in society, people have become more selfish and self-centred. 17 out of 21 people agreed or strongly agreed, and only 2 disagreed. This showed that my film subject is relevant to my audience and so made me more confident about my film idea. I also asked about their own experiences of selfishness in society to see how relevant it is in my audience's lives and to get inspiration of what selfish acts to show in my film. A running theme of people not being aware of their surroundings was clear in the responses, and so I used this for one of my selfish acts in the film, where the man bumps into Scarlett, knocking the paper out of her hands. These responses were also key in the opening of my short film, as I used these responses to help create the video wall, where I had lots of different people talking about their experiences of selfishness, helping to emphasise the importance of the issue. Audience feedback was crucial when making my film, as I wanted to continually check that my film was making sense and had the intended effect on my audience. After my first draft was complete, I got some audience feedback to make sure that my overall plot made sense and that they understood the message behind it. The feedback I received was positive, however, after continuing to edit it, I felt that my film didn't have a strong enough social realism element. I then did more audience research, however this time I asked my fellow media students, as I wanted to find out whether the film was clear in its social realism genre, and they would have been the most knowledgeable about the social realism genre and its conventions. The feedback was all quite similar, that the storyline itself had social realism elements, but it could have been more explicit and clear in the filming and the editing. This caused me to look back at the social realism conventions and other social realism films to see what I could add in my film to make it more clearly social realism. The main element that I added to my film after this audience feedback was the documentary style, as I saw that this was a key element in many social realism films. Finally, once my film was finished, I posted it on social media sites such as Facebook, along with another survey. This allowed me to get final audience feedback on my film and get their opinions. Once posted, people began sharing my film, which meant that I reached a much wider audience than if I was the only person to have shared it. I got some audience feedback through comments and messages after I posted the film on social media. However, due to these not being anonymous, I couldn't be sure people were being truthful, as they could have been biased. Therefore, by including an anonymous SurveyMonkey survey, this allowed me to get more honest feedback and also allowed me to find out about my audience's opinion on certain important elements. These responses gave me valuable insight into my audience's opinions on my film and therefore will help me make future films even better. In my A2 course, I both developed my skills in media technologies and learnt new skills through using new media technologies. I was introduced to new software and Media 2.0 tools in A2, and by exploring these, it allowed me to create more interesting and professional looking products. When starting my A2 course, I created a new blog which I used to present and share my research and planning. I started my blog with research into different theorists, and used different Web 2.0 tools including Prezi, eMaze and GoAnimate to present my research. All of these I was already familiar with due to using them during my AS course. However, I discovered a new Web 2.0 tool, Canva, which quickly became one of my favourite presentation tools due to its ease of use and professional looking templates. It is very simple to use. You simply choose what type of document you are looking to create, pick a template that matches the way you want it to look, and then edit the text. I found the site very user-friendly and it allowed me to make professional-looking documents that I could easily download and embed on my blog. Another interesting yet quite complicated tool I learnt this year is Photoshop, which I used to create my poster. To start with, I found the software quite complicated and spent a lot of time looking at tutorials of how to get the effects I wanted. However, once I had a basic understanding of the different tools in Photoshop, I found it much easier to edit and create my poster. I wanted to challenge myself when it came to the titles of my film, as I'd usually use the ones readily available on Final Cut and iMovie, and so this time I created my titles using Adobe After Effects. I found this to be a much more complex and difficult tool to use, and so I struggled with creating something completely original. I instead found a template which I altered the effect and colours to create the appearance of my title that I desired. The use of this complex tool made my film appear more professional and sophisticated, as the titles had an effect that was much less common to those already on Final Cut. When creating my evaluation, I wanted it to be more visually interesting, and so I experimented with the use of green screen. This was a lot easier than I had first imagined, as you simply had to tape some green paper to a wall, making sure there are no bumps in the paper and that it is evenly lit, and then film yourself in front of it. Then you have to import it into Final Cut and simply drag the Kia effect over the video and then add the images you want in the background. I found this effect to be very effective in my evaluation, and it was a lot easier to execute than I first imagined, and so I will definitely use this effect in the future.